Hello, today I want us to look at the costing techniques. Costing techniques. Now, during our last lesson, we said that costing techniques are those methods that are used to determine the cost of a price for decision making and other appropriate measures to be taken. Just imagine, I would like you to imagine this. If you manufacture bread so that you go and sell, you must get to understand the cost that you incur in manufacturing that bread so that you determine the price at which you're going to sell that loaf of bread. Sometimes we calculate the cost of manufacturing a single item. Sometimes we calculate the cost of manufacturing items in bulk or in large quantities. For example, I can calculate the cost of maybe manufacturing a carton, a packet, a box, a sack, in terms of sacks. That's where even when you hear maize farmers saying that I managed to harvest 50 bags, and the appropriate cost of production per bag is this amount. This farmer is calculating that cost in terms of bags or in terms of one bag. Alright, now there are different techniques or there are different methods that we use to calculate the cost of production or the cost of producing an item. So we'd like to highlight these methods just as we said during our last lesson, and then we are going to see what each entails. So the first costing method or the first costing technique is what we call uniform costing. All right. Then marginal costing. Marginal costing. We also have what you call the standard costing. The standard costing. Then we said we have another method of costing which is called the historical costing. Historical costing. Then we have what we call direct costing. And then we have what we call the absorption costing. Absorption costing. Okay? Now, let's begin with the first one, that is uniform costing. Now, what happens during this kind of a costing is very simple. We have what we call comparison, where we try to compare goods and then we standardize the cost, or we try to compare the cost of producing various related items. Then after that, we put the costs at a uniform cost. For example, a company deals in confectionaries. Confectionaries are sweets, bread, cakes, and so forth. Now, if the cost of producing a cake is 50 shillings, and the cake is the same size as that of a bread, then we can approximate and say the cost of producing this cake is equivalent to the cost of producing the loaf of bread, since the sizes are the same, the production requirements are the same. That's what we call a uniform costing, where you try to control the comparison costs. Yeah, it is used of the same costing principles. All right, marginal costing. Now, under marginal costing, what happens is very simple. We arrive at this cost by comparing what we call the fixed costs and variable costs. All right. So now, once we bring together the fixed costs and the variable costs, then we come up with the cost in terms of marginal costing. For example, examples of fixed costs include costs like that of electricity. You know, electricity will never change in terms of consumption. If once you understand that you use 50 watts per day to produce a particular product, that will cut across. If the same is used and the process is the same and the duration is the same. Now, variable costs include things like transport, because you know transport may not be the same every day. Sometimes it fluctuates, sometimes it changes. All right. So, bringing together the fixed costs and the variable costs, then we try to come up with a uniform or a marginal cost in between. All right. Let me assume that we have a graph here. Then we have fixed costs on this side. Then we have variable costs like electricity. So let me assume that the cost of electricity, the cost of transport is 500 shillings, while the fixed costs, stands at 50. So what do? No, probably if the variable cost goes down and the fixed cost remains constant, all right? The fixed cost will remain constant. There is a point here where the two will meet. Now I can comfortably say that the cost of producing this item lies here. All right? Yes, that's how we come up with marginal costing. Standard costing. This is where we try to, a comparison is made of the actual cost with the pre-arranged standard cost, and the cost of any deviation variances is analyzed by cost. Okay? So comparison, where we try to come up with a standard costing, we try to carry out the comparisons, comparing what happened yesterday and what happened today. Is the process the same as what happened yesterday? So if what we did yesterday is exactly what we've done today, in order to produce a product, then we shall definitely carry out what we call a standard costing, kind of an approximation, where we say, okay, yesterday we incurred a cost of 5,000. It is the same cost, given that everything has remained constant. Historical costing. This is where we look at the history of production. What used to happen last year, the cost that we incurred to produce products last year, given that maybe nothing has changed. Ceteris paribus, or meaning that everything remains constant. No change in cost of raw materials, no change in cost of transport. Then we can refer back to the history and say, if last year we used to produce bread at a cost of 5 million, so it's the same, so we can continue selling the same at the same price. All right. Then we have got what we call the direct costing. This is where we charge, or this is the practice of charging all direct costs, variable and some fixed costs related to operations. So you bring all the costs together directly. Transport costs, that is both fixed and variable costs. We don't do like this. We just directly charge and say, okay, electricity, 5 shillings per unit. Water costs this. Flour costs this amount. The total, okay, that's the cost of production. We directly charge, or we directly approximate the cost by direct costing. Absorption costing. Now here we say that it is the practice of charging all costs, both variable and fixed, to operations, processes, or products. This differs from marginal costing, where fixed costs are excluded. So in this, we don't include the fixed costs. So the fixed costs are excluded. Costs like electricity, we tend to exclude the fixed cost in absorption costing. But we take all the other variable costs, For example, if it is water, if it is transport, we shall include all that under absorption costing. But we don't include the fixed costs under absorption costing. All right. So now, that is what I wanted to clarify as far as this is concerned. so that now, during our next lesson, we shall look at the pricing techniques. Now remember that once you've come up with the costs of production, the other thing that you need to do is to come up with the price of a product. There are four methods that are used to determine the price of a product. So these are costing techniques. I hope you've understood this. Let's look at the pricing techniques. Pricing techniques. So these are the methods that are used to determine the price of a product for decision making. For decision making. We have got four types of pricing techniques. Number one, so we have, can say, types of pricing techniques. Types of pricing techniques. So here we can say, number one, we have what we call the cost-based technique or cost-based pricing. Then we have what we call the demand-based pricing. Demand-based pricing. Then we have what we call competition-based pricing. Competition-based pricing. Then we have what we call the affordability-based pricing. Affordability-based pricing. Affordability-based pricing. Okay, now let's touch each at a time. Cost-based pricing involves now the costs. That is where you look at the cost, or you try to examine the cost and understand how much it costs you to produce a product. And then from there, we shall have the price that we are going to sell at, or you are going to sell that product at, determined by the cost of production. Now, for example, let me assume that I used 100 shillings to produce a loaf of bread. I don't expect to sell, or I'm not going to sell that bread at 100 shillings. I must consider the profit that I'm going to make. I can either mark up, where we maybe get the profit by adding a figure. Like I can say the markup price is 50 shillings. So I had 50 shillings. I say I'm going to sell it at 150. So it's the cost plus the profit. Alright. Then we can have what we call the cost plus pricing. I mean, the cost plus pricing is where you add something to the cost of production. Alright. Now, demand-based pricing. This is where the price of a product depends on demand. When the demand is very high, the cost goes up. Even if you look at the matatu industry, the aviation industry, when demand is high, the price of course shoots up. In the evening, when you're going home, you find that matatus charge a lot of fare because they know that there is a lot of demand at that time. Aeroplanes, in the aviation industry, you realize that during the peak season, they tend to charge a lot of money or a lot of price. Competition-based pricing, this is where you charge based on competition. Yeah. If you are offering the same product or you are selling the same product, how do you sell, or what price do you sell at, so that you actually ensure that the costs, or you ensure that the competitor, the person who is competing you, does not maybe compete you out. You have to check on competition, and then at least you set a price that is close to your competitor, unless maybe your product is very unique. That's when you can set a very high price as compared to your competitor. But if you're offering the same products, everything is the same, then I think you don't need to charge a very high price. You need at least to standardize, considering the price that is being charged by your competitor. Another factor is affordability-based pricing. This is where you charge based on affordability. How much can the people or your customers, your target customers, afford in terms of price? That's why, for example, if you go to Hilton today, you will take a cup of tea at maybe 500 shillings. Why? Because that hotel has set its price based on affordability. Those people who go there, those who can afford. But if you go to a hotel or a restaurant or a kiosk, a Mama Mboga's kiosk at a place like Budurwa or Kayole, you find that a cup of tea goes for 10 shillings. Why? Because of affordability. The target customers cannot afford a cup of tea at 500 shillings. If you charge a cup of tea in those places at 500 shillings, nobody will buy, alright? So those are the factors that we consider. Now, I shall give you notes on the same, but for today, I would like you to understand that. So today we've looked at the costing techniques and the pricing cost techniques. Understand each and you will be okay. Thank you very much.